I'm James, and believe me when I say this isn't just some twisted drama. It's the unfiltered reality of my life, as raw and messed up as it can get. Until recently, I genuinely thought I had everything figured out. A flawless marriage, a wife who felt like my soulmate, and a best friend who had been by my side forever. My wife, Emily, who I've shared 8 years of marriage with, was my everything. We did it all together. Weekend hikes, experimenting with new recipes on lazy Sundays, and those spontaneous road trips that led us to random beaches where we'd laugh like children. And David? He was practically a brother to me, inseparable since we were in grade school. I poured my life into my work, putting in crazy hours. We're talking about high-stakes corporate stuff, filled with endless meetings and phone calls at all hours. I always believed it was worth it. We were crafting a life together, planning vacations, saving for a house. Every shift I worked was meant for us. Or so I thought. David was always in the picture, and it never raised a red flag for me. If anything, I appreciated how well he and Emily connected. He'd come over, hang out, have dinner with us, and they'd reminisce about all the goofy things we did as kids. To me, it felt like we were one big happy family. Looking back, maybe that was my downfall. I trusted too easily. Or perhaps I just didn't want to confront the reality staring me in the face. Then my dad, Michael, came to stay with us for a while. He was recovering from knee surgery and needed some help getting around, so we set up the guest room for him. Having him, there was like revisiting the past. His loud laughter, his love for grilling, and his relentless teasing about when we'd finally give him grandkids. It felt comforting like family should, but it also marked a turning point the moment everything began to crack. My dad has this uncanny ability to notice everything, and I mean everything. He's got that old-school instinct, a sixth sense about people. I used to think it was just him being overprotective, but when it came to Emily and David, he saw right through them. Initially, it started with small comments. He'd casually point out that Emily and David seemed awfully close, or make jokes about their inside jokes. I brushed it aside, insisting they were just good friends, and besides, Emily was the kind of person who hugged everyone. She was warm and outgoing. That's what drew me to her. Yet, the nagging look on my dad's face never left. One day, I decided to come home early from work, feeling the weight of it all and needing a break. The office politics and endless grind were wearing me down, so I took a half day. As I walked in, I expected to find Emily curled up with a book or practicing yoga, but instead, I found her and David way too close on the couch. The way they quickly sprang apart when they noticed me felt like the guilty reaction of someone caught doing something wrong. They laughed it off, claiming they were watching a comedy special, but I could sense something wasn't right. I didn't confront them then. I couldn't quite wrap my head around what I was feeling. That's when Dad started talking about the looks. He'd catch Emily sneaking glances at David when she thought nobody was watching. These long, lingering stares that felt more intimate than friendly. And David? He'd flash this smug grin whenever Emily was around, as if they were sharing some unspoken secret. It was eating away at me, but I kept convincing myself I was just imagining things. Was it paranoia? Or was it simply stress from work? Then one night, after dinner, Dad and I were out back having a beer, chatting about life and the future. You know, the usual. Suddenly, he said, "Son, I need to tell you something that might not sit well with you, but it's important." I laughed it off, saying, "What's new? You always have something to say." But his expression was serious. "I think there's something going on between Emily and David," he stated. My gut twisted, feeling like I'd been punched. I shot back that he was out of his mind, reading too much into it. But deep down, that seed of doubt had taken root. The thing is, my dad has always been blunt. If he thought something was off, he'd say it, never one to lie or exaggerate for no reason. He dropped the subject that night, but I could see he wasn't convinced, and neither was I. I began to pay closer attention, trying to act like everything was normal, attempting to be the trusting husband who believed in his wife and best friend. But I caught these small things. Emily quickly pulling her hand away when I entered a room, David giving me a tight smile that never reached his eyes. Despite everything, I kept trying to convince myself I was losing my mind. I was overreacting. That's the most painful part about being cheated on. You start to gaslight yourself. You tell yourself you're paranoid, that you're imagining things because facing the truth is far more painful than living a comfortable lie. Then came that Saturday afternoon that finally flipped a switch in my dad's head. I was out running errands, and when I returned, I found my dad on the front porch, looking like he'd just seen a ghost. Inside, Emily and David were laughing way too loudly over some silly joke, but as soon as they spotted me, the laughter came to a screeching halt. It felt like walking into a room where everyone suddenly fell silent. When I asked Dad what was going on, he merely shook his head and muttered, "We'll discuss this later." That night, while Emily was in the shower, Dad came to my room and said, "We need to figure out what's really happening, James. Something's off, and I'm going to get to the bottom of it." And that's when everything began to unravel. He wasn't wrong. Deep down, I sensed it too. But nothing could prepare me for the shocking truths we were about to uncover. After that conversation with my dad, a shift occurred. I tried to act like everything was fine, to play the clueless husband who didn't suspect a thing, but inside, I was drowning in suspicion. I wasn't alone in this. My dad, Michael, became a hawk in our home, always watching, always listening. It wasn't something he wanted to do, but he couldn't help it. There was this instinct he had, a father's radar telling him something was terribly wrong. And honestly, I was thankful for it, even if I couldn't say it out loud. While I was trudging through my workdays, pretending that everything was just fine, Michael remained home. He was supposedly recovering from his knee surgery, but we both knew the real deal. He was on the lookout for Emily. At the time, I didn't grasp it, but he had quietly assumed the role of my guardian, trying to shield me from the bitter truth, or at least prepare me for it. The downward spiral began one afternoon. I had a crucial meeting at work, so there was no chance of leaving early. That day, Dad noticed something strange. Emily hadn't mentioned any plans, but just after lunch, she picked up the phone and invited David over. I can still picture Dad recounting it later, how relaxed her voice was on the call, as if she didn't have a care in the world. And when David arrived, he strolled in without hesitation, like he belonged there. Dad attempted to remain inconspicuous, staying in his room with the door slightly ajar so he could eavesdrop. They were laughing, just like old times. Yet, something felt off, something he couldn't quite identify. When he finally peeked out, he found them on the couch, far too close for comfort. It was as if they'd completely forgotten about him, lost in their own little bubble. Now I know my dad well. He's not one to jump to conclusions or act impulsively. But that day he told me he felt a significant shift within him, as if a wall he had built for my sake came crashing down. He couldn't ignore it any longer. He needed undeniable proof, something solid to present to me without leaving room for doubt. That's when the idea of installing a hidden camera struck him. I remember his expression when he later shared this with me, a mix of shame and determination. "James," he said, "I didn't want to do this. God knows I never wanted to spy on my own daughter-in-law, but I had to be certain, for your sake." So, while I was busy at work the following day, he discreetly set up a small hidden camera in the living room, placed so carefully that it would remain unnoticed. The plan was straightforward. Observe what transpired when Emily thought she was alone. The days that followed felt agonizing for both of us. I was swamped with work, trying to maintain the facade of normalcy, but my mind was in turmoil. Every time I returned home, I found Dad acting jittery, as if he wanted to spill a secret but couldn't find the words. And Emily? She was just Emily. With her radiant smile and warm laughter, she embodied everything I adored about her. Yet, once doubt begins to creep in, nothing feels genuine anymore. Every touch seemed forced, every word felt rehearsed. And David? He kept showing up more frequently, almost as if he knew I was out of the picture whenever I wasn't home. After a few days of footage, Dad finally mustered the courage to watch it. He later told me that part was the hardest, sitting alone in his room, hitting play, and bracing for his worst fears to unfold. The initial clips showed nothing out of the ordinary, just Emily lounging around, texting, scrolling through her phone. But then it happened. One afternoon, Emily let David in, and all bets were off. They wasted no time. As soon as the door closed, they were on each other, kissing passionately, hands exploring like two teenagers caught up in a whirlwind of desire. The footage showed them collapsing onto our couch, my couch, and the rest, well, you can only imagine. My dad didn't need to elaborate. Just the sight of Emily and David together in our home was enough. He said he had to stop watching. The rage bubbling inside him became too intense to bear. I thought I was going to punch a hole in the wall, he confessed. He was at a loss for how to confront me, unsure of what to say or how to deliver such devastating news. It was a truth you can never unsee, the kind that tears your world apart. That evening, when I walked in, Dad was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his hands. Emily was out with friends. At least, that's what she claimed. I remember entering and seeing his pale face, as if he'd seen a ghost. "What's going on, Dad?" I asked, trying to keep it light, but he couldn't meet my gaze. "We need to talk, James," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. And that's when he spilled everything. Each word struck me like a bullet. The hidden camera, the footage, David coming over, everything. I felt completely numb. I could hardly breathe. It was as if the very ground beneath me had crumbled, and I was trapped under the rubble. My heart raced, my ears buzzed, and all I could hear was the sound of my life fracturing into countless pieces. But he wasn't finished. "James, you need to see this for yourself," he said, pulling out his laptop. A few clicks later, I found myself staring at the screen, watching my wife and my best friend betray me in the most intimate and revolting way possible. I was torn between wanting to smash the laptop, cry, or just retch. I couldn't bear to watch it all. The moment they started, I slammed the laptop shut and hurled it across the room. It crashed against the wall, pieces scattering everywhere. I was trembling, my fists clenched so tightly I thought my knuckles might shatter. My dad stood frozen, hands raised as if he wanted to grab me, to restrain me, to stop me from making a rash decision. "James, calm down," he urged. "We'll figure this out. We'll handle it the right way." But I wasn't listening. All I could think was how my entire life had been a lie, how Emily and David had made a fool of me. Now I had to figure out what the hell to do next. After that night, everything shifted. You'd think that knowing the truth would bring clarity, but it's the exact opposite. Everything blurred together into a chaotic haze. Every touch, every smile, every word Emily had ever said replayed in my mind as I tried to figure out how I had missed the signs. It felt like I was inhabiting someone else's body, just pretending to be James, the happy husband, while inside, I was in ruins. As for my dad, Michael, he was at a loss for how to interact with me. It was as if he was constantly searching for the right moment, the perfect words to check in on me without overstepping. I'd catch him watching me, worry etched across his face, like he was afraid I might break down at any moment. How could he possibly know what was swirling in my head? Hell, I didn't even know. I tried to go through my daily routine as if nothing had happened. I'd wake up, shower, head to work, and do my job while teetering on the edge of a breakdown. But there was this gnawing emptiness inside me. At the office, it was business as usual, deadlines, endless meetings, phone calls that never seemed to end. None of it mattered anymore. I wanted to scream at everyone, to yell that I had been betrayed, that my wife and best friend had shattered my life. Yet I held it together. Just barely. Emily acted like nothing was amiss. She'd still greet me at the door with a bright smile, still kiss me goodnight. And that smile, that infuriating smile, I wanted to wipe it off her face every time I saw it. But I had to keep up the charade. It was like living in a twisted reality where she played the role of the loving wife while I was the fool. And David? He was still around, still laughing with her, still acting as if everything was perfectly normal. The sight of them together made my stomach churn. Dad was a mess, too. He paced around the house, muttering to himself. Occasionally, he'd attempt to pull me aside, asking if I was okay, trying to broach the subject of what comes next. But I wasn't ready for that talk. I needed time to process everything. Honestly, I didn't want him to see me crumble. Then one night, everything finally came to a head. I returned home late from work. I deliberately stayed longer just to avoid being around Emily, and found my dad sitting on the edge of the couch, a beer in hand. I could immediately sense that something was off. He looked utterly defeated, as if he had been shouldering an enormous burden all day and could no longer bear it. "James, we need to talk," he said, and my stomach dropped. I knew what was coming, but hearing it out loud made it feel all too real. I noticed his hands trembling as he set down his beer and gestured for me to sit. I tried to make some excuse, saying, "It's late. Can it wait until tomorrow?" But he shook his head, his eyes wide and pleading. "No, son, this can't wait." I sat down, feeling as if the walls were closing in on me, trapped in a nightmare I couldn't escape. Then he laid it all out. He explained how he'd been watching Emily, how he'd set up the camera, and what he'd witnessed on that footage. His voice was steady, but the pain and desperation of a father trying to protect his son from the worst truth imaginable seeped through. Every word felt like a punch to the gut, stripping away the life I thought I knew. I wanted to shout, to throw him out of the house, to insist he was lying. But then he offered to show me the footage. I didn't want to see it. God knows I didn't want to witness it. But it was as if I had to. Like I couldn't move forward until I saw it with my own eyes. He opened his laptop, and there it was. Just a few clicks, and suddenly the screen displayed Emily and David, tangled up together on the couch. The same couch I had sat on countless times before. My couch. Our couch. I remember staring at the screen, gripping the edge of the table, so tightly my knuckles turned white. It didn't feel real. How could this be happening? This was my wife, my best friend, and they were... I couldn't even finish the thought. I was struggling to breathe. My body felt like it was ablaze, rage bubbling up from a deep place within me. I wanted to tear them apart, to make them feel every ounce of pain they'd inflicted on me. But I couldn't let them see that. I couldn't let them know I was aware of the truth. Not yet. So I told my dad to close the laptop, to delete the footage, to pretend he had never seen it. He looked at me as if I'd lost my mind. "James, what are you saying? You can't just act like this didn't happen." "I'm not acting," I snapped, my voice barely under control. "I'm going to make them pay. But I'll do it my way. And when I do, they won't see it coming." That night, I lay in bed next to Emily, staring at the ceiling while my mind raced with a million thoughts. She slept peacefully, curled up on her side, looking so serene. It made my stomach churn. All I could think about was the lies, the betrayal, the way she'd laughed with David as if nothing was wrong, as if I were some fool who hadn't noticed a thing. I knew I had to be strategic. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my actions. If I confronted them right then and there, it would only give them an escape route, allow them to play the victim. No, I needed to be patient, to find the perfect moment to strike. I wanted them to feel the same agony, the same humiliation that they had thrust upon me. I craved to watch their lives burn the way they had torched mine. The next few days were nothing short of hellish. I had to maintain a facade of normalcy, plastering a smile on my face when all I wanted to do was scream, and laughing when tears were threatening to spill. Every time David stepped through the door, or every time Emily texted him right in front of me, I had to bite my tongue so hard that I could taste the metallic tang of blood. But I knew it was worth it. The longer I kept my cool, the more they would let their guard down. And when that moment came, that's when I would strike. Every night, I found myself lying awake, my mind racing over the details. How long had this affair been going on? Where else had they crossed the line? How many times had I been deceived? Each question cut deep, but I needed answers. I needed to understand just how far their betrayal stretched. Then a realization hit me. I didn't merely want to catch them in the act. I wanted to annihilate them, to make them feel every ounce of anguish they'd inflicted on me. But I had to be calculated. Every move, every word, every action needed meticulous planning. And when the moment was right, they would witness the havoc a man with nothing left to lose could unleash. The following days felt like an endurance test. I swallowed every bit of pain, every shard of anger, burying them deep within. I went to work, attended meetings, and pretended to care about projections for the next quarter, all while grappling with the knowledge that my life had been ripped to shreds behind my back. And every evening, I returned home to Emily, the woman who greeted me with a bright smile, pretending our life was still perfect, as if nothing had changed. Confronting her was not an option. Not yet. If I exploded in that moment, all I would receive would be her flimsy excuses, her tears. I didn't want to hear excuses. I craved consequences. So I kept my emotions bottled up, allowing my anger to simmer, allowing my hatred to fester. Each fake smile Emily flashed at me, every time David texted her when I was present, those moments burned themselves into my memory. I needed answers, and I needed them fast. I began to scrutinize every detail, the dates, the times, the excuses that fell flat. I'd steal glances at her phone, sifting through messages to piece together their interactions. Whenever she claimed to be out with friends, I'd call those friends, casually asking questions like, "Hey, did Emily mention what you all did last night?" More often than not, their stories didn't add up. Before long, I had constructed an entire mental calendar of lies. Nights when Emily was running errands, working late, or just needed some time for herself. It was all a sham. One Saturday, while she was in the shower, I seized the opportunity to grab her phone, and that's when I hit the motherlode. There it was, text from David hidden under a fake name in her contacts. Tina. It was almost laughable. He was clever enough to disguise himself, but not savvy enough to cover his tracks. "Miss you today," one message read. "Last night was incredible, and the most gut-wrenching. Can't wait to see you again when James is out of the house." Reading those messages made me feel nauseous, but at the same time, it was the validation I desperately needed. This wasn't a fleeting mistake. This was an ongoing affair happening right under my nose, and they thought they could get away with it. I shared everything with my dad. One evening, we sat outside with a couple of beers, and I laid it all out for him. The texts, the lies, every detail I had pieced together. His face flushed with anger, his fists clenched so tightly that I feared he might crush the can. "We can't let them get away with this," he said. "They need to be exposed for who they truly are." I nodded in agreement. We brainstormed different approaches to confront them, discussing how to ensure there would be no escape from the consequences of their actions. That's when Dad suggested the idea of a public confrontation. "They've humiliated you, James. It's only right they experience the same humiliation," he said. The plan was straightforward but brutal. Gather our closest friends for a seemingly innocent gathering, then drop the bombshell. A projector, a few incriminating clips from the footage Dad had recorded. It would be like a slow-motion train wreck, and they'd have nowhere to run. I'll admit, part of me hesitated. This was Emily, the woman I thought I'd share my life with. And David, my best friend since childhood. But every time doubt crept in, every time I thought about a quiet confrontation, I remembered those texts. I recalled how they laughed together, how they deceived me daily. In those moments, my resolve hardened. I wanted them to pay. I wanted them to endure every bit of shame and pain they had forced upon me. The next few weeks morphed into an excruciating waiting game. I had to tread carefully, act as if nothing had shifted. And believe me, it was torture. I endured dinners with Emily, listening to her recount her day, pretending to care about the trivial dramas involving her friends. I feigned ignorance of how she would sneak away to text Tina, or how she dismissed my attempts to connect. And David? He still dropped by every few days, grinning like a fool, probably convinced he was pulling one over on me. But I was playing my own game now. I was setting traps, collecting every scrap of evidence I could find. I'd go out of my way to leave the house, making excuses to be busy so they'd think they had the freedom to act without restraint. And sure enough, every time I left, David would make his move. The texts, the clandestine meetings, it all confirmed what I already suspected. Finally, the day of the party arrived. I remember waking up that morning with an unexpected sense of calm. I had dreaded this day, but now that it was upon me, I felt ready. Ready to unleash the chaos. Ready to finally confront Emily and David, to force them to face the harsh reality they thought they could escape. I spent the entire day putting on a facade, smiling, laughing, and going through the motions as if everything was perfectly fine. Emily was absolutely thrilled about the party. She adored hosting events and went all out to ensure everything was flawless. David, naturally, arrived early to help set up, and I had to swallow the rising nausea each time I caught sight of them together. But I managed to keep my composure. I knew that by the end of the night, their little fantasy would come crashing down. Around 7 p.m., friends began to trickle in. There were drinks flowing, music playing, and laughter echoing. The sort of carefree vibe that would keep anyone from suspecting a thing. Emily was in her element, socializing, and embodying the role of the perfect hostess. And David? He was right there with her, all smiles and jokes, probably thinking it was just another night where they could indulge without a care in the world. As the night wore on, though, I could feel the tension bubbling within me. Each laugh rang in my ears like an insult, and every smile felt like a knife digging into my back. After a couple of hours, the moment finally arrived. I spotted my dad standing off to the side, giving me a subtle nod, like a silent agreement to proceed. I took my glass, tapped it with a spoon to grab everyone's attention. "Hey everyone," I announced, my voice projecting over the music. "I just want to thank you all for being here tonight. Emily and I have really been looking forward to this, and there's something I'd like to share with you all." Emily stared at me, her eyes wide, a small smile on her lips. She had no inkling of what was about to unfold. David was equally clueless, and that was the sweetest part of all. I strolled over to the projector we had set up earlier, my heart racing, and hit play. For a brief moment, confusion blanketed the room. The screen flickered to life, and the footage began rolling. There was Emily and David, cozied up on our couch, laughing, touching, kissing, and then more. Gasps erupted around the room, and shocked whispers filled the air as people processed what they were witnessing. Emily? She froze, the color draining from her face. David's expression twisted into pure horror, as if he'd just seen a ghost. "What the hell is this?" Emily screamed, rushing toward me, desperate to snatch the remote. But it was too late. Everyone could see, everyone knew. I simply stood there, meeting their gazes, feeling a wave of cold satisfaction wash over me. "This," I stated, my voice unwavering, "is what you've both been hiding. And now, everyone is aware." Chaos erupted afterward. Emily was screaming and crying, trying to justify herself, but there was no way to spin this situation. David attempted to escape, but a few of the guys blocked his path, demanding answers. And me? I remained rooted in place, watching the whole thing disintegrate. Because finally, after all the lies and deceit, the truth had come to light. The night of the party felt surreal. I had imagined every possible scenario in my head, rehearsed my lines 1,000 times, but when the moment actually came, it felt like I was walking through a haze. I kept myself busy, pretending to be the perfect host, making small talk, pouring drinks, cracking jokes as if nothing were wrong. And Emily, she was positively radiant. I suppose that's what happens when you believe you're untouchable, when you think you've outsmarted everyone around you. David, of course, showed up. He always did, and as usual, he acted like everything was perfectly normal, flashing that annoying grin as if he wasn't betraying my trust behind my back. I watched him wrap his arms around Emily from across the room, his hand resting on her lower back for just a beat too long. It took every ounce of strength I had not to shove him through a wall right then and there. But I needed to keep my cool. I had to let them think they were safe until I was ready to shatter their little world. The hours dragged on as friends continued to arrive, filling our house with laughter and chatter. Everyone seemed to be having a great time, which only made what I was about to do all the more satisfying. Emily buzzed around, chatting with guests, looking incredibly happy. David stayed close by her side, always just within reach. I played my role, pretending not to notice how often they exchanged glances, how their hands would graze against each other as they moved around the room. I could feel my dad's eyes on me the entire time, his silent support reminding me to stay focused. Finally, the moment had come. I cleared my throat and tapped my glass with a spoon, garnering everyone's attention. Emily turned to me, her face lighting up like it always did when I spoke. David looked up, as oblivious as ever, that same goofy smile plastered on his face. I took a deep breath, bracing myself for what was about to happen. "I just want to thank everyone for coming tonight," I began, forcing a smile. "Emily and I are incredibly grateful to have such amazing friends. And there's something I'd like to share with all of you tonight, something I think will be very enlightening." I could sense the tension in the room shift, the curiosity etched on everyone's faces. Emily glanced my way, tilting her head in confusion. "James, what are you getting at?" she asked, laughter tinged with nervousness bubbling up. David's expression shifted to one of blank disbelief, and I could see that flicker of fear pass through his eyes. Deep down, he understood that the moment of reckoning had arrived. I didn't respond. I simply walked over to the projector, switched off the lights, and hit play. Instantly, the living room wall illuminated with the damning footage of Emily and David. For a heartbeat, silence enveloped the room. Just the muted sounds of their laughter, whispered words, and bodies entwined. And then, chaos erupted. "What the hell is happening?" Emily shrieked, sprinting toward me, her face a whirlwind of panic and rage. But I stood my ground, refusing to waver. I allowed the footage to continue playing, letting the truth pour out before our friends. Gasps echoed, murmurs filled the air, and cries of disbelief surged through the crowd. Some friends averted their eyes, unable to watch, while most remained frozen, glued to the screen as they bore witness to the unraveling of a marriage in real time. David tried to articulate a response, but his voice trembled, choking on his words. "James, man, it's not what you think." He reached for me, but I swatted his hand away with contempt. "Don't you dare," I warned, my voice icy and resolute. "Don't you dare attempt to defend this." The atmosphere crackled with a mix of shock, disgust, and pity, while Emily descended into a full-blown crisis. "James, please," she begged, tears streaming down her cheeks. "This isn't fair. You need to let me explain." "Explain?" I interrupted, my voice cutting through the chaos. "What is there to explain, Emily? You lied. You betrayed my trust. You shattered everything we built together, and now everyone can see you for who you truly are." I turned my gaze to David, who looked like a deer caught in headlights, pale and quaking. "And you," I spat, venom lacing my words, "I trusted you. I welcomed you into my home, my life, and this is how you repay my kindness? You're dead to me, David. Both of you are." The room fell silent, punctuated only by Emily's sobs and David's ragged breathing. In that stillness, I made my final declaration. "I'm filing for divorce," I stated, locking eyes with Emily. "And as for you, David, our friendship is finished. I never want to see either of you again." With that, I turned on my heel and walked out, leaving them standing in the ruins of their deceit. I didn't look back to witness the fallout, indifferent to the whispers or accusations that were sure to follow. All I felt was relief. For the first time in weeks, I could finally breathe again. The following days were grueling. Emily pulled out all the stops, begging, crying, yelling, desperate for my forgiveness, hoping to work things out. She insisted it was a mistake, that it didn't mean anything, and that we could salvage our relationship. But there was nothing left to salvage. I had seen too much and heard too much, and the thought of being with her after everything felt like trying to choke down shards of glass. Navigating the divorce process was a nightmare. Endless disputes over asset division, relentless back and forth with lawyers, and many sleepless nights where I thought I might lose my sanity. Emily kept trying to justify her actions, attempting to paint me as the villain for exposing her, for refusing to give her a second chance. But the truth was I didn't want another chance. I just wanted out. David reached out to me once, calling late one night, sloshed and slurring his words, drowning in remorse as he apologized endlessly. I hung up on him, blocked his number, and erased every picture, every text, every shred of memory I had of him. In my eyes, he was a ghost now. For a time, I moved in with my dad. It felt strange to return to my childhood home, as if I had completed a full circle. But there was also comfort in it, being with someone who truly understood, who supported me without casting judgment. I started seeing a therapist, working through my anger, my hurt, and my guilt. Gradually, day by day, I began to pick up the pieces. I reconnected with old friends, those I had lost touch with because of my marriage and the sacrifices I made for a life built on lies. I took up new hobbies, hiking, dusting off my guitar, activities that reminded me of who I was before Emily entered my life, before the deception. One morning, I found myself standing on a balcony at dawn, the cool breeze brushing against my face as I watched the sun rise over the horizon. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story. It was a chance for a fresh start, and I was ready to embrace whatever came next. I had no idea where life would lead me or what the future held. But standing there, watching the sky awaken with the hues of a new day, I felt a peace that had eluded me for years. Deep down, I knew I would be okay. Because sometimes, the most powerful form of revenge is simply moving forward.